Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. As always, my name is Anna, and today will be the final installment in our series of Munchausen syndrome. Today we will be covering Dee Dee Blanchard. If you missed last week's video on Lacey Spears, I will have it linked down below for you, and then you should see something up here to go ahead and watch that. So let's get started and jump in. When most people tell the story of Dee Dee Blanchard, they mainly focus on her murder and then what came after her murder. I want to do things differently. I want to first focus on what led up to her murder, and then the aftermath of it. Claudine Dee Dee Blanchard was 24 and living in Chack Bay, Louisiana. Dee Dee would get pregnant with her only child and her only daughter, Gypsy, in 1991. When Dee Dee found out she was pregnant, her boyfriend, Rod Blanchard, insisted that they get married. Dee Dee would then give birth to Gypsy Rose Blanchard on July 27th of 1991. Shortly after Gypsy was born, Rod had realized that he was not actually in love with Dee Dee, nor could he become in love with Dee Dee. He mainly got married with her because it was the right thing to do. And this was the 90s, so it's not like today. And back then, if you were pregnant and you weren't married, it was really frowned upon. So I could see why he married her without actually loving her. So after coming to this realization that he just didn't love his wife anymore, the two would separate and divorce. Even though they were divorced though, Rod would still have a part in Gypsy's life, at least for the first half. Because when Gypsy would get sick, Rod was there. When Gypsy was a baby, Dee Dee was already starting to claim that Gypsy had medical conditions to Gypsy's father, claiming Gypsy couldn't breathe and that she had seizures while she was sleeping. She told Rod that the doctor had diagnosed Gypsy with sleep apnea. By the time Gypsy was around the ages of 4 through 6, Gypsy would have had eye surgery to scrape a part of her eye cornea. When I did my own research on this type of surgery, the only type of surgery that I could see that kind of describes this type of procedure is called a superficial keratectomy. And it's basically removal of the corneal epithelial down to the level of the bone and membrane. So pretty much it's like shaving down a piece or a layer of your cornea. Well, along with this surgery, Gypsy would also have tubes placed into her ears, which is really common when you get like a lot of ear infections. Another thing that Dee Dee would claim that Gypsy had was muscular dystrophy, is another thing that Dee Dee would claim that Gypsy had. And what that is basically it's just weak muscles and weak to the point where Gypsy couldn't walk. And because there's a laundry list, and Dee Dee would also claim that Gypsy had epilepsy, as well as that infamous feeding tube that every single one of these cases has had. Rod Blanchard would try to see his daughter Gypsy as much as he could, even after they were divorced. However, as Gypsy got older, those visits, they would become less and far in between. And it's believed that the reason for this is because Dee Dee was basically using Gypsy to kind of like, I don't want to say extort, but pretty much she wasn't allowing Rod to see Gypsy as much as she was getting older. I personally think it was because she was afraid that Gypsy was going to tell. Aside from this though, Dee Dee would also give Gypsy the impression that her dad didn't like her, that her dad didn't really want anything to do with her either. So this was the complete opposite, however. Rod would try to see Gypsy whenever he could. He would ask, but it's those situations where when the mom gets custody, she pretty much has the power, and when the dad can see their kid, and vice versa when the dad has custody. But in this case, Dee Dee had the power, and she pretty much would not let Rod see Gypsy as she was getting older. And in this, Rod was still having to pay, even though he wasn't seeing his child, he was still paying child support. He was also paying Dee Dee alimony, and he was also covering part of Gypsy's medical bills as well. So Gypsy and her mother would move to Slidell, Louisiana, and then later on to the New Orleans area. And in living in New Orleans in around 2005, Gypsy and her mother Dee Dee were impacted by Hurricane Katrina. And Hurricane Katrina, if no one is familiar, big giant hurricane happened on August 29th of 2005. It was pretty much like a Category 3 hurricane and one of the worst hurricanes in history. They would move from New Orleans to Aurora, Missouri, and they were actually gifted a home by Habitat for Humanity in 2008. Habitat for Humanity is kind of like one of those organizations that goes and like builds home for the people who are in need. Given what was wrong with Gypsy, they of course did qualify for one, and I believe when they were gifted the home, they were also gifted like a vehicle, because they had like this van that they were traveling around in, and they couldn't really get around with it. So I believe, if I'm correct, that when they gifted them the home, they also gifted them a vehicle as well. And this was like a free house, so they didn't have to really worry about paying anything. Now, another thing that Dee Dee would do is she would commit what I would call fraud. In my opinion, it would qualify as fraud. She would change Gypsy's age on paperwork, on like legal paperwork. She would alter her birth certificate, showing Gypsy's birth year and making Gypsy younger. The reason that I believe that Dee Dee did this was because once Gypsy turned 18, she was pretty much an adult and she could do what she wanted. Her mom didn't really have a say, and her mom wanted to keep the power, so she would alter birth certificates and such and like fool people into thinking that Gypsy was underage so that she could still have that control and that power over her. For example, Gypsy was born in 1991, and one birth certificate would show 1991, and then there would be another that would show 1993, and then another that would show 1995. And then I believe Gypsy mentioned before in an interview that she found like a Medicaid card, and on there it showed 1995, which would have at that time aged her at 15, but in reality she would have been 19. So this was something that even Gypsy was fooled into thinking what her age was. And another thing too is that Gypsy's father would be fooled into this as well. And my thing though is that how do you not know how old your child is or when your child was born and be able to do the mental math to be able to figure that out? And I mean, it works because in a way, when she's doing this and making Gypsy younger, she's still getting like this child support. And she's obviously still getting the alimony, she's getting the child support, he's still paying for medical bills. Rod pretty much, in his estimates, believes that Dee Dee scammed him out of $150,000 between child support, alimony, and medical expenses after Gypsy turned 18. But like I said, how do you not know when your daughter turns 18? Whether you're in her life a lot or not, how do you not know? Another thing is that between the years of 2007 and 2009, doctors would see Gypsy all the time for numerous things. And when she would be asked about her medical records, Dee Dee used Katrina for pretty much the biggest excuse. She would say that Gypsy's medical records were lost in Katrina, so she didn't have them. And because it was a big, giant natural disaster, doctors pretty much had to believe her and go off of what she was saying, that A, B, C, D, E, F, G was wrong with Gypsy. It would be found that Gypsy's medical records weren't actually lost in Katrina, but it goes to show what lengths Dee Dee went to keep this whole thing a secret. One doctor, though, pretty much did stand out from the others, and that was Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein. He would see Gypsy about her muscular dystrophy. However, when he conducted his x-rays, he didn't find anything wrong. So to pretty much make sure that he had all his boxes checked, he requested an MRI. When the MRI came back and showed that there was nothing wrong, there was nothing medically wrong, so that she couldn't walk. He brought this up, and Dee Dee wrote him off and was like, "You don't know what you're talking about. Leave my family alone, pretty much. I'm never coming to see you again." When Gypsy was interviewed later on, Gypsy would say that her mother would always just give her a routine that she had to follow whenever they would be at the doctor. She was to greet the doctor, say, "Hello, how are you? How are you doing? I'm well, thank you for asking," and then be quiet the rest of the visit. Everything else was going to be answered by Dee Dee. So Dr. Flasterstein, he would note in his medical file that he did believe that Dee Dee may suffer from Munchausen by proxy, but here's the thing though, is that medically, whenever a doctor believes that someone is suffering from Munchausen, they're supposed to note it and they're supposed to call CPS and let CPS take care of it. Well, in this case, he didn't do that. Dr. Flasterstein did not do that. The reason that he would give for why he didn't do this was because he felt that if he called CPS and made the claim, that Dee Dee would be able to talk her way out of it. He basically wanted to have as much information as possible before he went out and made these claims, which I can understand, but if you're medically required to report this, you should probably do it, but I can kind of see where he's coming from because we've seen a lot of these mothers get away with CPS. Another thing that I do want to touch on before we move forward in this case is a runaway attempt that Gypsy would try to get away from her mom. So this happened in 2011, and what would happen is that she met a man at it was like a Comic-Con sci-fi convention thing. Gypsy would say that she told the man that she was trying to get away from her mom. She didn't want to be with her mom anymore. Give him that story. And then he would take her to this hotel that they were staying at. I guess it was like him and some of his buddies. So he would take Gypsy there. Well, Gypsy would get caught. It turns out that the friends that he had knew Dee Dee. And as soon as they saw Gypsy, they called Dee Dee and were like, "Hey, your daughter's here. Like, do you know about this?" And Dee Dee went to the hotel to get Gypsy. So she gets to the hotel and she demands to get Gypsy back. Well, the guy tells her, "Oh no, she's 18. She doesn't have to go with you." But then Dee Dee pulls out this paperwork. Like, this woman brought legit paperwork to show that Gypsy was 15 and that she was underage. And because this guy was like, I think like 35 or 39, somewhere in his 30s, he obviously didn't want to go to jail. So he's like, "Hey, you got to go. She's got paperwork." And when that happened, Gypsy and her mom go back home. Gypsy would say that her mom smashed her computer. She would tint the windows of the house so that no one could see in, and she would chain her to her bed. And when she did need to go to the bathroom, she was like going, and then Dee Dee was right behind her, following her, and then leading her back and chaining her back up. Dee Dee would also go on to abuse Gypsy, beating her with what Gypsy described as like a coat hanger, and also starving her. And Gypsy would claim that this abuse went on for about 2 weeks and that it was like a sort of punishment for trying to run away from her. So now that we've gone over that, I want to move forward to the year 2012. Gypsy would get back online, and she sort of did it like in secret so that her mom wouldn't see, because after the incident, her mom let her back on the computer, but it was mainly just supervised. Like, her mom had to be there, sitting next to her, seeing everything that she was doing. But in secret, Gypsy had her own Facebook profile. She even got on an online dating site, and it was an online Christian dating site, and that is where she met Nicholas Godejohn. Now, Nick was around 22, 23, and he was living in Big Bend, Wisconsin. Gypsy would say in interviews that their relationship started really fast. Like, the first week that they met, they were friends, they were chit-chatting, and then by the second week, they were in like this serious relationship. Now, initially, when they met online, Gypsy would tell Nick that she had all of these things wrong with her, which up to this point was epilepsy, cancer, the muscular dystrophy. She had something wrong with like her saliva gland, so she had to have that removed. Pretty much everything that you can think of medically wrong. She had a feeding tube, she couldn't walk, her teeth were like being extracted bit by bit. She had vision problems because of her seizures, because of the epilepsy that she was behind. All of these things that were wrong with her, but Gypsy believed that these things were wrong with her, except for two things. Gypsy knew that she could walk, and she knew she could eat. So about a year into her relationship with Nick, Gypsy would tell him the truth about the walking, about being able to walk, and all of the other stuff. And as she found out that things weren't true about her, she would tell him as they were being revealed. So after Gypsy tells him this, she kind of gets scared because she's been lying to him essentially, but he tells her that he kind of knew that she could walk. So he wasn't really worried about it. And the two would continue their relationship in secret and online. They would meet in real life, and obviously, and the first time that they met was on March 12th of 2015, and it was at a movie theater for the premiere of Cinderella. So the plan was that they were going to meet, and they were going to go to the movie theater. They were going to act like they didn't know each other, that they had just met there, and Nick was going to make this very good impression on Dee Dee, and Dee Dee was going to like him, and they were going to live happily ever after, like in all of these Disney movies that Gypsy had seen her basically her entire life. However, it's not a fairy tale, this is reality, and the plan did not go according to plan at all. Dee Dee did not like Nick at all. She pretty much thought he was kind of like creepy and such, and he just did not want Gypsy anywhere near him. So they're at the movie theater, they're watching the movie. I believe Gypsy's mom, Dee Dee, moves up a few seats, and Gypsy, because she's in a wheelchair, you're very limited to where you can sit, and she would sit kind of like, I guess, close to Nick, and they would pretty much kind of like sneak away during the movie and go to the bathroom and get intimate in the bathroom of a movie theater. So after this, Gypsy goes back to her mom's, but the movie's pretty much already almost over, and her mom gets mad at her, and she pretty much takes Gypsy to the restroom at the movie theater and just slaps her, and then takes her home. And then once they're home, Gypsy says that her mother verbally abused her, was calling her all sorts of words that YouTube won't let me say, but you get the gist. So after all this has happened, Gypsy still wants to be with Nick. She thinks he's her Prince Charming. She wants to have that happily ever after. Well, this is when Gypsy starts getting ideas, and she gets two ideas in her head. One idea is to get pregnant. She says, if I get pregnant by you, my mom has to accept you and we'll live happily ever after. When Nick wasn't really down for that plan, she resorted to plan B, and coincidentally, that's what they ended up calling the plan, but she went on to plan B, which was to her mom. Gypsy didn't come to the conclusion that actually happened right off the bat. She tried to poison her mom first, and when that wasn't working, that's when they decided to go with the... So our boy Nick here, he is a boy who suffers from mental illnesses. He is diagnosed with autism, and he also has multiple personality disorder. However, that was never diagnosed. So later on, it couldn't really be used, but he would claim to have it. And one of these multiple personalities was someone that we would call Victor. I believe that's what his real name was. And he was someone who was capable of someone. So Gypsy, the mastermind, would ask the type of weapon that Victor would be comfortable with using. And Nick would tell her that he liked to stab. So they decided to go with a knife that Gypsy purchased. So the plan was that Nick would take a bus from Wisconsin to Missouri in June of 2015, and this was about 3 months after they had first initially met. And that's what happened. On June 10th of 2015, he would get on the bus, get on his way there, and on his way there, he would text Gypsy, "Is your mom a light sleeper?" And Gypsy would let him know that her mom was a light sleeper and that she'd like to sleep on her belly. So once he got there, he would text Gypsy. So he gets there, he gets to the hotel, and he texts Gypsy, "I'm on my way." Gypsy gets prepared, and they're texting. I'm going to have... You'll see text messages up here. Get an idea of what was being said. But pretty much he's texting her, and once he gets there, he says, "Hey, I'm here," and to open the door. Now, I don't blame Gypsy, but at the same time, I'm conflicted on how I feel, honestly, because, her mom did do her dirty, but at the same time, I don't know. But anywho, Gypsy would open the door and hand him the gloves, the knife, and duct tape. And as she's handing this to him, she would tell him, and I quote, "You're my hero, I will never leave you," end quote. Nick would instruct Gypsy to go to the bathroom, turn on the shower, and close her ears, cover her ears like this so that she couldn't hear anything. Well, Gypsy would do this. She would go to the bathroom, she would cover her ears, she would turn on the tub, and she would wait. Nick would go into Dee Dee's room, and he would begin to stab Dee Dee Blanchard to death. He stabbed her multiple times. I believe it was like 17 times, and he also slashed her neck. Gypsy would say that even after being in the bathroom with the shower on and her ears covered, she could still hear her mother scream, but it wasn't like a scream of, oh my God, I'm dying. It wasn't like a horrible scream. It was more like a scared, oh my God, what the hell is happening sort of scream. And that she did call out for Gypsy. I can't imagine. So this goes on for a few minutes, and eventually the screams stop, and Nick goes to the bathroom, and he tells Gypsy that his finger got cut while he was doing the deed and to patch it up for him. After she patches it up, he then orders her to clean up the blood stains that are in the bathroom, in the hallway, clean up everywhere, and not the bedroom though. The bedroom she stayed out of because I don't think she wanted to see that. But before leaving the house, Gypsy would pack her belongings. I can't talk today. Gypsy would pack her belongings. She would take the nest money that her mom had, which this was money. Like, not only was she getting like the child support, the alimony, stuff like that, she was getting like donations, charities were giving her money, like there was money. So she's taking this, and she also goes ahead and turns up the AC. Well, would it be turned up or turned down? It'd be turned down. She turns down the AC so that it can get really, really cold, because when you make the room cold, it makes the body decompose faster. So it's kind of harder to tell time of death, which is kind of creepy to know. But anyways, so they leave the house, they take a taxi, they go to the hotel, and the next day they're on their way back to Big Bend, Wisconsin. Well, there's just one little problem that they overlooked. A million little problems, but one of those million was the knife. They didn't just leave the knife because fingerprints, I'm assuming, but they couldn't obviously take the knife on the bus with them. So what they decided to do was mail the knife to themselves in Wisconsin. Bought a big manila envelope, put the knife inside, and mailed it to themselves to discard. So in the days following, Gypsy is now free of her mother. She doesn't have to be worrying about being in a wheelchair. She doesn't have to worry about her feeding tube. She doesn't have to worry about anything. And in this, she starts to feel guilt for what happened to her mother. And with this, she starts to tell Nick, and Nick's like, I'm sure someone's found her body by now, but because nothing's coming up on the media, and I believe that even if somebody had found her body, this would have made media attention because Gypsy Rose was well known. I mean, she got a house by Habitat for Humanity, so, but she was well known. And I believe that this would have made media coverage because people would have been looking for this girl with everything that people thought was wrong with her. Gypsy Rose, Part 3. So what the pair decide to do is they decide to make a Facebook post, and the Facebook profile that they would do this to is on a joint Facebook account that Gypsy shared with her mother. The reason that they made a Facebook post was because Gypsy was hoping that someone would see it and get concerned and go check on them, which did end up happening. But the Facebook post was made on June 14th of 2015, timestamped at 3:32 p.m. She wrote, "That bitch is dead." And about 10 minutes later, at 3:49 p.m., she commented below on that post, and I quote, "I fucking slashed that fat pig and raped her sweet, innocent daughter. Her scream was so fucking loud, LOL." End quote. So neighbors start reading this post, and some get concerned. Others are commenting like, were you hacked? Is this a joke? What kind of movie are you watching? Things like that. And one of the neighbors did end up going to the home, and when no one was answering, they called police to go ahead and do a wellness check. Well, when police got to the scene, they're doing a wellness check, and when you're doing a wellness check, you legally can't go into the home unless you have probable cause. And the police officer felt that there wasn't enough probable cause to go into the home himself without a warrant. So the neighbor asked him, like, hey, would I get in trouble if I went in and I happened to walk around? And the police officer was like, I didn't see nothing. So the neighbor goes into the house using like one of the kitchen windows, and he goes through the house, and he says that the first thing that he noticed was that it was really cold, but that there wasn't really anything too out of the ordinary. Like, he noted that Gypsy's wheelchairs were still there. She had like 3 separate wheelchairs, and they were all still there. But other than that, he didn't really notice too much. And so neighbors are concerned, and police, after being told, hey, Gypsy's like special needs, like what can we do, they pretty much prioritize it, and they still have to wait for a search warrant to be able to legally enter the home. Now, that search warrant would come a little after midnight on June 15th of 2015. They would enter the home and begin to look around, and they would discover the body of Dee Dee Blanchard in her bed underneath her covers, covered in blood. So at this point, they found Dee Dee's body. Gypsy's still missing. Everybody freaks out. This is a special child. This is a child who's on a feeding tube. This is a child who's in a wheelchair. This is a child who has illnesses. So they pretty much prioritize it to find Gypsy. And at this point, it's a murder/missing person. So police would trace the IP address that was used when the Facebook post was made. And what an IP address is it's pretty much like your mailing address for the web, is how my boyfriend described it to me. So how we have in the real world, we have our home addresses, we have our P.O. boxes. When we're online, our IP address is our mailing address. It can be tracked to our location. That's why there's softwares like that can offer you like different IP addresses. So like mainly using for like when you want to watch Netflix in a different country or something, you can get a different IP address so that the internet thinks, hey, they live here, so they get access to this Netflix. So it's kind of like that. So they trace the IP address, and they trace it to a mailing address in Big Bend, Wisconsin. And this is the address of Nick's parents' house where they're staying. So they get in contact with police in Big Bend, and then next thing you know, you have everybody ascending to the house of Nick and his parents. And they found Nick and a very well walking Gypsy. So Gypsy would say that her last words that she ever spoke to Nick were while they were being taken by the police. and it was that they were always going to stick together. Considering what happens, bold words. Bold words. Police right away would arrest Nick and take Gypsy. They kind of were still under the impression that she was a victim and not a conspirator, but they would take them and they would start interviewing. They would interview them separately, and Nick, while he's being interviewed, Gypsy is seen on camera resting, like with a blankie and everything. And while he's being interviewed, Nick would tell them that he has the multiple personalities, that he has autism. No, it was his parents that mentioned the autism, but Nick mentioned his multiple personalities. He mentioned that this was Gypsy's idea. He's telling them that he would do anything for Gypsy and all this stuff, being very lovey-dovey.
Hello, Gypsy. Hi, I'm Lieutenant. I brought Nick in, and Nick was just really, he was concerned about you, so I want to check to make sure you're fine. Looks like you're doing good.
Is he all right?
And he is fine as well. He was very concerned about you, and he wanted to make sure you knew that.
Tell him
So,
I'm okay.
Perfect. That's what I'll do. So,
And tell him they're treating me nice.
excellent. I will do that. Yeah, you got the nice couch. You got the nice room. We gave you the nice room.
Nice fishy room.
Yes, there it is. It doubles as a pillow. Rather nice. All right.
Okay, thank you so
You
much.
bet.
Well, Gypsy, when it's her turn to get interviewed, police would tell her that her mother was dead, that they had found her body, and Gypsy puts on a show. Like the police officer tells her, the detective tells her, your mom's dead. And Gypsy's like, whoa, wait, what are you talking about? And then starts bursting into tears. And I feel like those tears were real because, I mean, at the end of the day, it was her mom, and Gypsy says that she did love her mom. She just didn't love what she did to her.
Okay, your mom's dead. Okay, now what I want to ask you
Wait,
is
what?
your mom's passed away. Okay, and she's deceased. All right. Now what I want to ask you: did you have involvement in this? Okay.
No.
Hang on. Listen to me for just a second. Okay. I want you.
Anywho, she begins to cry, and then that's when police start asking her, did you have anything to do with this? And she would say no. She would stand by the fact that she did nothing. So they would both be arrested, and police would do a press conference. And in that press conference, they would say that everything isn't what it seems. And then that's when they would confirm that Gypsy could walk, and they would confirm, as everything was developing, that things weren't really true. So Nick and Gypsy are both arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and Nick is also charged with armed criminal action. So they would go to arraignment, and bail would be set for both of them at $1 million. Gypsy, in the end, would end up taking a plea deal, and in that deal, she got 10 years on second-degree murder and would be eligible for parole after 8 years. Way to stick together. But she was sentenced as of July 5th of 2016. Nick would go to trial, and he would be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. This case is a very hard case because I feel for both parties, because I feel for Gypsy because she was put through so much, and she was put through so much to the point where she just couldn't take it, and she saw that her only way out was to her own mother. And I feel for Dee Dee because I feel like with Dee Dee, she, I don't want to say loved, but loved her daughter and loved her in a different way and could only show love to her in that way. I believe that Dee Dee didn't really know how to show love to Gypsy any other way. But I do feel for both in this case, and in my opinion, Gypsy is a victim, but at the same time, not really, because she planned it with Nick. And as far as Nick goes, I feel like he was a victim of Gypsy, because Gypsy afterward would give like interviews saying that it wasn't never really love, it was more lust. And to this day that I'm aware of, Nick still feels for Gypsy. They haven't ever spoken ever since that day that they got caught, but he still feels some love for her, and that's really sad. But anywho, I'm gonna go ahead and end the video here, and please let me know all of your comments, concerns, questions down below. I'd be happy to chat with you. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.
Mama, I'm a criminal. Mama, I'm a criminal.